I want to speak on a subject here this afternoon that's somewhat challenging to give as well, perhaps to listen to in some respects. Certainly a sobering topic whenever it has to be brought up. It's a topic that is generally hushed in our society today, but is touching more and more families all the time here locally in our communities and our cities around the country. That's the subject of suicide or taking one's own life, kind of the opposite of what we heard in the first message about preserving life. This is where someone desires to end or to take their own life. I mentioned in my update about a week ago that Judy and I had attended a suicide prevention seminar there in the Woodlands. It was titled Suicide, A Community's Response. And it was sponsored by the Herman Memorial Hospital, and they had personnel there mentioning how many times people are coming into the emergency room or to the hospital as the result of trying to take their own life, and how that is growing, and it has increased over the years. Also sponsored by the Woodlands Development Company, and that happens to be where Judy is employed. The purpose was to help the community become more informed and actually kind of be open and talk about something that is a growing reality more and more, which anybody would say is sad to be the case. There's certainly a growing problem in Montgomery County involving the schools as well as the businesses and the entire community. Well, I felt a sermon on the subject certainly would be deserving of our attention here, at least for a split sermon. I think we need to be aware of what's happening in our society, some of the reasons why. I think that's important for us. We need to be alert to the signs that someone might be contemplating that, or things entering into their mind. Know a little bit about how we can help someone. Learn what to do if we find ourselves in a dark place. Well, we all have our moments. We all have portions of our life, you might say, that we'd say a little darker, not exactly what we would wish them to be. And we can all focus on that and sometimes get down and sometimes be a little depressed about that. But I mean, in circumstances where we really are down and in a very dark place. What do we do if we find ourselves in that set of circumstances? And we're going to consider a little bit about what the Bible has to say about the subject. Now, that's a lot, and there's no possible way I can do a great deal of justice to those topics in one split sermon. It's a complex subject, certainly. I'm not necessarily a trained psychologist or trained in this particular topic, but there are things that we can learn, and there are things important for us to cover. No need for me to go into the statistics about all of this to kind of convince you or show you that indeed it is a problem, because it is alarming. Probably about 42,000 individuals took their own life last year in the United States, but how many more tried? There's vastly more that attempt it than actually succeed in doing so. It's the second leading cause of death between the ages of 10 and 24. Those are young people. Their life ahead of them. But it's the second leading cause of death, them taking their own life. It's startling. We've all heard, in recent months or years about former combat soldiers, the PTSD, and their struggles coming from combat, or maybe they were injured, they come back home, the adjustment, maybe they're trying to go to the Veterans Administration Hospital, there's not a lot of help, it's wait and wait and wait, it becomes very depressing, very discouraging to them for a number of reasons, and I think there was up to the point where there were like 22 former soldiers, combat personnel, taking their lives. It was either a day or a week. Just a terrible number. Sometimes, of course, it involves people that are terminally ill. That enters their mind as well. And we know that often it affects many celebrities, people that you think have got life made. Recent one, Robin Williams, very successful comedian and actor. Social circumstances enter into the equation at times. You know that during the time of the Great Depression, many people took their life. They lost their life savings, worked all their lives, and now it's wiped out, it's gone. They have nothing, or they were so used to a lifestyle, so used to a certain amount of money and discretionary spending they could enjoy and the better things of life, and that's gone. And coping with all of that change was very difficult. And so there was certainly a spike and an increase at that particular time in our nation's history because of the Great Depression. It makes you wonder about the days ahead. They are not going to be pleasant, according to Bible prophecy. How will people respond? Well, I think it'll be similar for the reasons that we'll see a little bit later. Let's talk about, getting closer to home, and I think sometimes we all know individuals here or there, probably touch many of our lives, but following the seminar, just a matter of a few days, Judy's former boss, she worked for a lady for a number of years there at the Woodlands Development Company, her immediate boss, and she left and went on to something else, and Judy moved into her position and responsibility. But just a few days ago, at age 55, this lady took her own life. Very well known by the Woodlands Development Company and people in the Woodlands area. Age 55, seemingly had a lot of going for her. It was also true that a few years ago her son had taken his life. That has a way of affecting very deeply a mother, family members. So on and on it goes. It's not uncommon. Now, the Bible, there's about 7 different suicides in the Bible. A couple of them are where kings are in battle and they don't want to be caught. They don't want the enemy coming and abusing them, so they take their own life or have somebody take them. But there is a strange one in 2 Samuel chapter 17 we might go to. 2 Samuel 17. This is the account of Ahithophel. Ahithophel was the main counselor for Absalom as Absalom took over the kingdom from David and stole it from David. Well, David had a counselor that was favorable to David, and he was also able to give his advice to Absalom as well. So Ahithophel said, here's what we ought to do. This will take care of David. We'll capture him. It'll be the end of it. The kingdom will be yours. This is the wise thing to do, Absalom. Now's the time to act. But the other one, more favorable to David, said, no, I don't think you want to do that. That's going to be a mistake. And this one, well, anyway, Absalom took the second man's advice, the one more favorable, sympathetic with David. Well, in verse 23 of 2 Samuel 17, when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey, arose, got him to home in his house, to his city, put his household in order, hanged himself and died and was buried. I don't know what it was. He was just so mortified that somebody dared choose somebody else's advice over him. Maybe the pride. Maybe he didn't think he could ever live that reputation down. What would other people say? Who knows what was going through his mind? And yet here it turns out if he would have only waited, it turns out that it would have been proven that his advice would have been the better one. And of course, God was attempting to preserve David. Well, strange account. Of course, the most notable one is Judas. After betrayal of Jesus, he went out and hanged himself in shame, of course, as well. Well, at this particular seminar or lecture that we went to, the main speaker was a Mr. Kevin Hines. He's an award-winning global speaker, best-selling author, documentary filmmaker, and a suicide prevention and mental health advocate. So he gave a glimpse of his life story. And he mentioned that his parents were both suffering from bipolar disease or syndrome, or however they call it, and were manic depressive. And he and his sibling, he was only 9 months old at the time, he and his sibling, of course, were being neglected because to deal with their pain that they're dealing with, because of their depression, they, of course, turned to drugs, turned to alcohol and hard drugs and heroin and so on. There went all the family money for their fix. So they were going from hotel to hotel. The kids were malnourished. They weren't being fed. They were being neglected. The parents were off trying to get money for their drugs, and it's a terrible scene. Finally, the social services stepped in and took the children away, and I think the parents went to jail. Well, they're going from one foster family to another. They stay there a while, and then they're transferred over somewhere else. And young Kevin, as a young boy, about 9 or 10 months, he's always crying. Always crying. Of course, the foster parents, I can't deal with this. Kid won't be quiet. He won't shut up. We can't take him back, and they'll put him in another home. Well, they couldn't take him. So bouncing around and bouncing around. Well, the doctors took a look at young Kevin, and they said, there is nothing wrong with this boy. It's all going on in his head. Well, he explained in the account of the story that there was this one lady that came to the foster establishment there and said she was looking for a young girl to be in their home because they already had a young boy. And she saw Kevin and kind of fell in love with him, went home to her husband, well, I really want this child. Well, okay, they took Kevin in. Now he's in with them. And Kevin said he was just very young, not yet a year old. He remembers being in the crib, and he remembers his mother now, the one that adopted him, saying, you're okay now, Kevin. You're home. We love you. It's going to be all right. You're here with us. We want you to be our son. And he said from that time on, he began to get better, and all of that crying and all of that disruption went away. Somehow he felt secure. Somehow he felt loved. Somehow he felt accepted, and that this was going to be his parents, it was going to be his home, and he was okay, rather than this shifting around a few weeks here and a few weeks there and all the disruption. And that was very interesting insight into the importance of a home, the importance of nurturing, the importance of a stable environment for children, to have a nurture, to feel loved, to feel wanted, as well as directed when they need to be directed when they're out of line. So then he already began to get better. But he explained how he began, as he grew up, the disease seemed to get worse, as he explained it, and it would cause very high highs. He would become almost delusional about what he felt he could accomplish. You're going to be the next president of the United States. But then in a few hours, maybe a day later, he's all down in the dumps, very discouraged, very despondent. Kind of these wide mood swings because of what he was dealing with. So he was struggling at school and having problems as he was going through middle school and high school, began drinking, began smoking marijuana, other things to deal with what he was trying to sort through and the pain that he was going through. No real direction in life, even though he started into college. So at age 21, he decided everybody's going to be better off without me. I just think everybody will be better off if I'm not around. So he headed towards the Golden Gate Bridge. They lived in Chicago. Got up to the Golden Gate Bridge, went from his home, went on the bus, and walked his way out to the middle of the bridge, jumped off. Last year, 46 people jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And there were 118 who were talked down. That's how many were attempting it. 46 went, 118 were talked down. 98% of people that jump don't make it. It's 250 feet. And when you hit that water, it's like concrete. You don't survive that distance hitting that water. So he jumped. Well, somebody saw him go over, and they called 911. 911 knows exactly what to do. People are jumping all the time. They call the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard's nearby. Send the boat out. Doesn't take very much time for them to do that at all. And the Coast Guard guy said, whoa, I think this one's alive. And he was. Somehow, he survived. Now, in his particular cases, he's explaining what he's gone through. He identifies himself as being bipolar or manic depressive and having, either the chemical problem or physiological challenge. Just like any part of the body can have difficulties or not function, that can also be true of the brain. But it's not always a matter of mental defect or some kind of a disease that would lead somebody to take this particular choice. I think our society today is contributing to this mindset, to this sense of hopelessness, of confusion about life. It's our value system. It's what we see around us. We see how people are living, the lack of right kind of examples and stability. It's growing. We're contributing to a mindset and to an attitude. We've got social media is a primary problem. It can be brutal at times, especially on young people. And they're very impressionable. And what people think of them is important to them. So we have social media. There are social media sites that advocate hurting yourself, advocate taking your own life. I don't mean 2 or 3, dozens. Here's how to do it. Here's what to do. You ought to do this. You can imagine that. As I mentioned, teens can be very vulnerable to what they find on that. There's cyberbullying. as well as just at school without the internet. One type of bullying or another, but a cyberbullying, threats, put-downs, ridicule, accusations. Why don't you kill yourself? Writing things like that. Sometimes kids thinking it's funny and not realizing how it's affecting someone else. Very negative. That can weigh somebody down. You're no good. You look funny. You'll never be anything. You're too short. You're too tall. You're too skinny. Whatever. It'd be very difficult for young people to cope with. There it is out there. Everybody's reading it. All your peers. This is what they think of you. Why don't you kill yourself? Or girls have made stupid mistakes. They've sent pictures of themselves, revealing pictures of themselves to their boyfriends. Well, that'll show how much I love him and he'll love me and all of that. Well, and she realizes he's nobody to stay with, or he dumps her. What happens to the picture? Now it's posted for everybody to see. There it is. He's getting even because you dumped him, or vice versa. There's the picture. You're mortified, absolutely mortified. There goes your reputation, shot. How am I going to live this down? How am I going to deal with this? Well, that can be very, very heavy for any young person. It'd be difficult for any adult as well to have all of that out there in the public. And there you are. Everybody knows when they think of that when they hear your name. Well, people begin to, we all can tell ourselves things. Well, I'm worthless. I'm ruined. I'll never be happy. You begin to own that. That's what you think about yourself. That's what you tell yourself. Sometimes somebody tells you different, and you don't even want to hear it. You just go through that same, rehearsing the same thing about yourself, and it's negative, and down you can tend to go. You're going to spiral more downward into negativity. So whatever the reason, of course, a person is dealing with a lot of pain from one source or another. Dealing with a lot of pain and can feel like, well, there's no way out. There's no way I'll live this down. There's no way out. I'll never be this or I'll never be that. Whatever they're thinking. Let me mention a few signs that might indicate somebody is really very despondent, maybe contemplating hurting themselves in some way. Obviously, if somebody brings it up and has verbal suicide threat, well, you'd be better off without me. I think our family would be better off if I wasn't around. If I wasn't born. Very negative things like that. I bet everybody'd be happy if I wasn't around here. Those could be signs not to just brush off. Expressions of helplessness, hopelessness. There's no hope for me. No help. Grades are dropping off. A lot of sleeping. Always in bed, kind of sleeping it off. Tired. Obviously, turning to substance abuse, as I mentioned before. Sometimes individuals begin doing all kinds of daring or risky behavior. What difference does it make? Oh, you can't jump off there. You can't do your skateboard off this. You can't ride that bike here. And I don't care. You might go over that cliff. I don't care. Not worried about what would be natural fear of doing certain things. Doesn't matter. Personality changes. A lot of crying. Withdrawn. Very quiet. You don't seem like yourself. You don't seem the same. What's going on? Give away prized possessions. What, you gave away your favorite necklace to Susie? You love that necklace. That was expensive. Saved a long time for that. You just gave it away? Something's going on. You gave away your motorcycle to Bill? You don't even like Bill. What are you doing? That's strange. You love that motorcycle. Obviously, signs of depression would tie in with that as well. A lack of any interest in future plans. Talk about the future plan. I don't care. No, it doesn't matter. Well, often there are signs this way. But as I mentioned, the topic is complex because there's not always signs. One lady at the lecture, and this was someone that Judy knew from work as well, or at least her contact with work, she gave a talk at this lecture. And her daughter had taken her life. She's a member of one of the Woodlands high schools. And this was just a few months ago. And there was her mother up there talking to everybody about it. It was not easy for her to do that. But she mentioned how her daughter was popular. Her daughter came from a good home. They were a Christian home. Went to church, very stable, a good income, good environment, good home life. She was on the cheerleading team. Very outgoing. Everybody thought she was a very outgoing young lady. Good grades. In other words, no signs. There's no signs, hardly at all, until that very day she was crying all day at school. Just the very, very last day. You don't always know what somebody is thinking. That's true for all of us. And sometimes, and you do have, if we're all facing something, we have sometimes a responsibility to tell somebody when we're really struggling with something. Of course, she didn't. After that, this, of course, now is some time since the lecture, a few weeks since we went, and I learned, my wife learned from the lady that gave the lecture that 2 individuals texted or emailed her and said, because of what you did, because of what you spoke on, I'm getting help. I'm asking somebody for help. So they obviously were in a place where they might have been thinking of hurting themselves, and they heard her, and they said, well, I took the advice, I'm going for help with a counselor or somebody. So that was part of the purpose of the whole thing. A community awareness, a little bit of understanding, as well as helping those that hear that to really ponder what they're doing. So how can we help a person who might be hurting? And we all hurt at one time or another, to one degree or another. We all need some things. We all need some help. Now, it's interesting that Kevin Hines said that when he decided he was going to the Golden Gate Bridge, he got on the bus, and he had to go from one bus and make the transfer and then get on this one and ride that, and then finally get up to the bridge. He had to walk across the bridge. And he said in his mind, because he was conflicted, he wanted out of the pain, the sense of he wasn't going anywhere, he wasn't worthless, some of whatever that was working in his mind in the chemical side of things, or the disease, however that functions. And while he was doing that, there was also a part of him that didn't want to do this, and he told himself, said, if one person asks what is wrong or shows that they care, I'll not go up to the bridge. I'll not jump. One person. But he said he got on the bus, he got in the back seat of the bus, and he was crying. And anybody could see he was just terribly distraught. His tears are coming down. Here's this kid crying. He said, nobody asked, are you all right, kid? Are you okay? Everything going okay? Can I help you? Concerned about you? He said, nobody asked. All that way on the bus, his whole trip over there. And people are in the city, and they're running here, and like, what kind of problems this kid have, and they're going here and there, and that's the way a city can be, people coming and going. Nobody did. Well, finally he got off the bus, got up to the bridge, walked to the middle of the bridge, and here came a lady. Here came a lady, and he thought, maybe this is the one that's going to ask me, are you okay, or show some concern, and I won't do it. So she got out to him, and she had a camera and said, could you take my picture here on the bridge? Take my photograph here on the Golden Gate Bridge? Well, why not? Okay, lady, I'll take it. So he took about 4 or 5 pictures, and she thanked him. She walked on, and that was the end of that. So a few moments later, he grabbed the railing. You know how you grab a railing about 4 feet, flip yourself over, and over he went. Finally, nothing was there. Nobody was there to give some help or to show that they were concerned. Somebody that may be hurting may not ask for help. Often they don't, but that doesn't mean that it isn't wanted. It doesn't mean they don't want it just because they're not asking. Most people don't want to do this. Kind of deep down, it's not what they want to do. They don't know anything else they can do. And, of course, they're telling themselves things that aren't often true, but they're convinced of that. They've rehearsed that. They just want to stop the hurting. They don't see another option, and then they're in a very dark, place. And just a word like, well, snap out of it, that's not going to be of any value. I was talking to one of the inmates. I was at the prison here this past week, and subject came up, and he explained about at one point where he was, very, very despondent, a very dark place. And when you're in that, you don't know hardly how to get out. You can't get out of that. And it's very heavy. It's hard for somebody that's not been there to really know that, to experience that. He said it's just a terrible place to be. Well, people find themselves there for one reason or another. So they're gripped by a feeling of self-loathing or a hopelessness or an isolation, and can't find a way out of the set of circumstances. Sometimes all of us in that circumstance might be afraid to bring something up, might be afraid to say something, but you're just being honest. You look down. You look discouraged today. Are you okay? Or even, you're not trying to hurt yourself, are you? You're not thinking about that, are you, if you felt that was warranted? Some other things. You could say, well, what are you telling yourself? Tell me what you're thinking. What are you telling yourself right now? You haven't seemed yourself. Are you okay? Did something happen? What can I do? I know you feel this way. Have you asked anybody for help? You're just being honest. It doesn't have to be some trained responses. You're being an honest, caring person. You're sharing your concern for them. You're not alone in this. I'm here for you. I'm going to stay with you. You may not believe it now, but the way you're feeling will change. I know it's hard now. You feel like this is the way you're going to live the rest of your life. That will change, I promise you. You're not going to stay that way. I may not be able to understand exactly how you feel, but I care about you. I want to help you. So you're being sympathetic. You're offering hope. You're not some trained counselor with some fancy technique. You don't necessarily have to have that. You let the person talk. Let them talk. It would probably be a time not to be judgmental about things. We don't need to hear that at the moment. Want to have some kind of hope. What should any individual do that finds himself or herself in a really dark place? Really, really low. Of course, anytime we find ourselves there, we've got to try to turn that around. We don't want it to keep going lower and deeper and darker. But an individual has to ask for help. And that is a responsibility. It's not everybody else's responsibility just to guess what's in your head. So there is the duty to ask for help, which is what a couple people did as a result of that lecture. As I mentioned above, they went forward. Find somebody you trust. Find somebody that you know is empathetic, that will listen, that will support you, not necessarily moralize with you at that point. You can't lie about it. You seem down. No, I'm not down. Well, it seems like you're not feeling good. No, I feel great. Is everything all right? Yeah, everything's all right. Well, if you don't tell the truth, what can somebody do? You have to get your mind off the negative. Obviously, we would pray and ask God to help us change our thinking. We don't ask God, just take this from me. Help me to change my thinking. And if I change my thinking, I won't have the same conclusions that I'm coming to in my own mind. Of course, we'll see about turning to God for that help as well, how we can do that. Obviously, we would not want to turn to substance abuse. Yeah, it feels better when you're drunk. Yeah, it feels better to be on marijuana or something else, but now your life's based on those substances. That doesn't help. Well, let's look at a few things from the Bible. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 12. These are factors that enter into the larger picture, and all we're touching on is that larger picture, you might say today. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 12, we've received not the spirit of the world. So there's a spirit out there in this world. It's always active, it's always working. we, of course, want the Spirit of God. That Spirit is active. That Spirit is going to tend to want to pull all of us down. It wants to be a drag and a hindrance. And it's always out there. It's always pulling us away from our best self. And we find ourselves to kind of our batteries run low until something charges them up again. That's the way the spirit of the world works. Ephesians 2 and verse 2. Ephesians 2 and verse 2. Does anyone hear thunder, or is that just me? Ephesians 2 and verse 2, wherein in times past you walked according to the course of the world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that works in the children of disobedience. There's a negative, carnal, selfish, lustful spirit in the air. It's just out there. You might say in some respects it's always looking for, like Satan is a roaring lion, it's looking for an opportunity where it can better work. So if you have a bunch of kids, let's say, on the internet, and they're driving into this one child's mind about how ugly they are, and they're skinny, they don't have any money, and they're this or that, those things are going to be very demeaning, and that's a mindset that would then lend itself to a kind of negative spirit. I don't mean a possession, I just mean a negativity. That's the way it works. You're not going to have that to the same degree in the millennium. John 8:44, Jesus was talking to the Pharisees and more or less said where their orientation was based spiritually. John 8:44, you're of your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, abode not in the truth. There's no truth in him. Your father the devil. You're following that spirit. Christians are in combat against that spirit. That's what we're called to. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. We wrestle against spiritual things, taking us away from the way of God, the peace of God, the confidence, the hope, the fruits of the Spirit. Wants to pull those away, get us into a place that we kind of can't get out of sometimes. That's very low, very despondent. So it's always looking for ways to work. We can't allow ourselves to dwell on the negative. We don't try to conclude that individuals that have tried to take their life, well, they're all demon-possessed. That would be way oversimplified. We don't claim that or come to that conclusion. There's a dark spirit involved somewhere, undoubtedly, that's going to be a factor to one degree or another, it would seem. I'm thinking about, as I was preparing this, I thought about the Jim Jones cult of a few years ago. Remember that? Drinking that Kool-Aid, kind of that suicide, murder circumstance that took place in Guyana. Well, he was strange. That leader was simply strange in his religious ideas, what he thought of himself, his delusions about himself. And even they interviewed childhood friends, and they said he was a weird kid. He was always talking about religion or death. Well, how healthy is that? And then he ends up, of course, taking these people, and they were some special work that God was doing. That was of the devil. I'm not saying everybody was possessed, but they were led down a road by a spirit. The Bible tells us, try the spirits. What kind of spirit are you talking to, listening to? Well, once you get into it, it's hard to get yourself back out of that. It's deceptive. It's mesmerizing. Well, let's read Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 26. Ephesians 5:26. Talking about the church in Ephesians 5:26, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the Word. God's Word is Spirit. It washes our mind. It cleanses our mind. It helps uplift our mind. We're more positive. We're on the right track. We're in tune with God's Spirit when we're attuned with God's Word. It washes us and cleanses us. God's Spirit and way has a right effect on our mind. The world, more and more, maybe Satan has a short time left, more is becoming stronger. Certainly in a society that used to base its values on biblical principles, Christian principles, those are being discarded with other spirits coming in. If it's a spirit not from the Bible or Christianity, what's the spirit going to be? Well, we know the difference in the spirit. Have the Feast of Tabernacles, there's a different spirit there. Nobody's perfect there. We get offended by our brothers at times at the feast, but it's a different atmosphere, a different spirit is at work. We feel it, we sense it. We go home more uplifted, more encouraged, more hopeful. All the things God's Spirit gives. All the things somebody trying to hurt themselves don't have at that moment. Gone. Same with the atmosphere here in church. That's what we strive to have. Everybody trying to strive for the unity in the church and the right spirit and treat each other the right way and speak to each other the right way. So we have to do our part for ourselves and not be responsible, obviously, for contributing to negativity anywhere in our home or church or wherever at work, wherever it might be. Well, how does God judge someone who takes his own life or her own life? Well, God obviously knows a person's heart. God knows what they're dealing with. He knows the deep hole somebody can find himself in. Sometimes it's physical. Sometimes it's mental. Sometimes it involves chemical imbalance. Sometimes things are happening to our mind. It's outside your control that way. God can forgive anybody of a sin when they're later sorry for that. They realize they made a mistake, well, even if that's in the resurrection. They can be sorry for attempting something. They can end up later being sorry they were successful. It's interesting that this Mr. Hines, I told you he grabbed the rail. Finally, when nobody said, "How are you doing?" and all the girl wanted was her picture, he grabbed the rail. You know, you flip your legs over and you go over the rail, and out he went. And he says the moment he flipped over, this was a mistake. That's what came into his mind. As soon as he was airborne, this was a big mistake. Why? Because now there's no turning back. There's absolutely no turning back. You can't grab the rail. It's up there now, and you're on your way down to concrete, virtually. And that went through his mind. This was a big mistake. Finally came to that at that particular sobering moment. Now, of course, he's in midair. So people can come to that and make those decisions. We know God can forgive that if they're remorseful about it. But we all are responsible for our own actions. We do have to account for things that we do. It's up to God to determine accountability. But it is wrong to take life. The Bible says you shall not kill. That would mean for yourself too. It's a bad example to others. Suicide is on the increase because suicide is on the increase. It's what more and more are doing, and that sets another example for somebody else. I guess that's an acceptable way. More people are doing it. You're responsible for an example to others that way, and causing pain to the ones that have left behind who never really get over that totally. So very sad. So it's certainly a wrong choice. But it can be very difficult without the help that somebody needs to get out of that. Well, what does God's Spirit try to tell us as we begin to wrap up here? A few scriptures. Luke chapter 12, verse 6 and 7. In Luke chapter 12, verse 6 and 7, are not 5 sparrows sold for a farthing, and not one of them is forgotten before God, even the birds? But even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. You're of more value than many sparrows. That's what we teach in the church. Your life is valuable. All members of the body are equal. It's not one member is more important than the other. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 12. That's the message of the church. That's the message from God. That's the message from God that He loves each and every one of us. If you were to go to the Bible, you have all kinds of personalities down through history that served God under difficult circumstances, and chances are you would be just like that personality or be in that set of circumstances. And that's what it'll be like in the millennium when all these people are coming up in the second resurrection. Somebody from God's church somewhere will go up to them and say, I know exactly what you are dealing with. I know exactly what it was like to be in prison 30 years. I know exactly what it was like to have this kind of physical ailment, or to be treated a certain way when you were growing up, or to be somebody from God's church will be there. Let me tell you how to be successful. And you're somebody, no matter how we compare ourselves among ourselves, you'd be like somebody in the Bible. So that's where you fit into God's plan, but you're not going to get that in the world. You don't have money, you don't look very good, you're short, you're tall, you're this, you're that, you're nothing. That's the world. Matthew 6:26. Matthew 6:26. Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much better than they? That's what God tells us. That's what God's Spirit will tell us if we allow it to speak to us. You'll be uplifted by that. God's a comforter. Well, I'll read, you can turn to Psalms 40 while I read Deuteronomy 8. It's the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Now, that's God's revelation, but sometimes when you're really down, really discouraged, those are just words that just don't apply to you. You just emotionally cannot connect to those words. It's extremely difficult. That's where we as brethren, as friends, we try to uphold one another as physical help. Remember, Jesus said, I'm terribly troubled. He was facing his final night. He said, stay with me for a while. Bolster me, encourage me. Well, they didn't see they had no idea what was coming. They were of no help whatsoever. God finally sent an angel to comfort him. Well, then Psalm 40, last verse here, verse 1. I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction and out of the miry bog. I was so deep, so dark, I didn't think there was a place out. Set my feet upon the rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Well, Mr. Hines tried to take his life, went over the Golden Gate Bridge. Of course, his life 98% of the time would have been lost. Now he goes around the world, he's lecturing, he's trying to help people that facing some of the same things, and now his life is of value, and he thought there is no value in it. It always turns out, if we go God's way, and I'm not saying that he did specifically that way, but if we go God's way, it turns out. God will turn it around. It's never as bad as we are telling ourselves when we have God in our lives. It's never that bad. But we'll rehearse things and tell ourselves things. Too often we get into that rut. It's never as bad as when we are telling ourselves what we're telling ourselves when we have God in our lives. And as God always reassures us, if God be for us, who can be against us?